After losing my position at a tech firm, I was desperate to find work. The savings I had wouldn't last forever, and every job opening seemed to vanish before I could even apply. It wasn't until one night, scrolling through an obscure local job board, that I stumbled upon a posting for an overnight caretaker. The description was vague, seeking reliable individual to oversee and secure premises overnight. Location disclosed after hire. Competitive pay. I hesitated. The lack of details was unsettling, but the pay offered was better than anything else I'd seen. I applied without much thought and didn't expect a response. 2 days later, I received a call from a man who identified himself as Mr. Lark. His voice was steady, formal. He explained that the position was mine if I wanted it. No interview, no questions. It felt too good to be true, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I needed the money. The following evening, just before sunset, I met Mr. Lark at a parking lot near the outskirts of town. He handed me a folder containing a key, a map, and instructions. Arrive at 10 p.m. Enter through the side entrance. Disable the alarm with the code provided. Patrol hourly. Do not leave before sunrise. Is there something I should know about the property? I asked, trying to mask my unease. His reply was brief. It's an old facility, decommissioned years ago. You'll find the details in the file. Just follow the rules. With that, he left, leaving me to pore over the documents. The map led to a building tucked away in an industrial area I hadn't even realized existed. The file described it as a storage space for props from a defunct theater company. At 9:50 p.m., I parked in front of the building. Its exterior was faded and unwelcoming, its windows boarded up and the surrounding lot overgrown. I stepped out of my car, the crisp night air biting at my skin, and approached the door. Inside, the smell of dust and decay hit me. Flicking on my flashlight, I took in the space. The building was cavernous, filled with shadowy shapes. As I moved closer, I realized they weren't furniture or crates, they were costumes and mannequins. Dozens of them, dressed in elaborate theater garb, their featureless faces turned toward nothing. I shook off the unease and walked deeper into the room, locating the alarm panel near a side wall. I keyed in the code and heard the satisfying beep of disarmament. With that done, I began my first patrol. The mannequins were unsettling. Some were seated in rows of mismatched chairs, as if watching an invisible performance. Others stood frozen in dramatic poses, their costumes dusty, but oddly pristine. The whole place felt alive, as if I had walked into a paused moment in time. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I spent most of the time in a small office at the back, scrolling through my phone. Occasionally I heard faint creaks, but I attributed them to the old building settling. At around 2 a.m., a loud crash broke the silence. My stomach flipped as I grabbed my flashlight and hurried toward the source of the sound. In the main hall, I found a mannequin sprawled on the floor, its head detached and rolling a few feet away. I frowned. I was certain it hadn't been there during my last patrol. Picking it up, I propped it against a wall and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. Telling myself it must have fallen on its own, I returned to the office. The following night, the atmosphere grew heavier. The building seemed darker, the shadows longer. I tried to stay calm, focusing on the routine, but as I walked among the mannequins, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Halfway through my shift, I noticed one of the figures had moved. It was subtle. Its arm was raised slightly, as if it had been reaching out. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was imagining things. But by 4 a.m., the laughter had stopped. More mannequins had shifted. One was turned slightly toward the doorway, another's head tilted upward. The changes were small, almost imperceptible, but they were there. On the third night, I arrived dreading what lay ahead. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was tired and letting my imagination run wild. This time, as I stepped inside, the air felt colder. I began my patrol, flashlight in hand, weaving between the rows of mannequins. Some wore masks, others wigs. Their lifelessness seemed less convincing tonight, as if they were pretending to be still. During my second patrol, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Spinning around, I saw nothing but empty space. My breathing quickened as I continued forward. When I reached the back wall, I froze. A mannequin stood in the corner facing me. I hadn't noticed it earlier, and its position was unnerving. Unlike the others, this one was dressed in a simple black cloak. Its head was tilted sharply to the side, as if it were examining me. I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand. A faint sound echoed through the room, soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps. The sound grew louder, and I bolted toward the office. Once inside, I locked the door, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. When I emerged for my final patrol, I found the mannequins arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the hall. My flashlight flickered as I stepped closer, dread pooling in my chest. In the center of the circle was something new, a mirror. Its surface was cracked, and it reflected the dim light in jagged fragments. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure lurking behind me. Instead, the mannequins began to move. Not a lot, just small, unnatural jerks, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. That was it. I sprinted for the exit, fumbling with the keys in my panic. As I opened the door, I glanced back one last time. The mannequins had turned, their featureless faces all aimed in my direction. I never returned to that building. When Mr. Lark called the next day, I didn't answer. Weeks later, I drove past the industrial district and noticed the building was gone. Only a patch of overgrown weeds marked where it once stood. I wish I could say that's where it ended, but sometimes, late at night, I hear that rhythmic tapping outside my window. I haven't worked up the courage to look.